anybody interested in comics, we have a comic book on nanodiamonds. You can download it actually from projectndx.com at the bottom there. I actually, we've been working on diamond now. I started my lab at Northwestern University a little over 10 years ago. And so, after doing a bunch of technical work and, eventually starting clinical trials, I wanted to get my kids, who are 3.5 and almost 5, interested in nano. So we made a comic book in collaboration with a bunch of oncologists, education experts, chemists, so on and so forth. And we have 2 versions out. We're working on a 3rd. So if you're interested, I got a 4.5-year-old to understand drug resistance with it. So, and a bunch of lawyers, who like adults too, who want to learn about technology in simple terms, hopefully. So, so hopefully you enjoy those comics. Again, for a little over 10 years, we've been working on nanodiamonds, and we use them for a variety of applications. I feel that for nanomedicine, there's a lot of really interesting nanoparticles being explored. And I think that as things start to progress towards the clinic, the average cost of developing a new drug range anywhere from 500 million to billions of dollars, in fact. Is there like a little bit of a twitch to this or something? Oh, my mic's not on. Muted. Can you hear me better now? Any difference? All right, so thank you. And so for imaging, I think this is a particular area where nanodiamonds are interesting because at Northwestern we developed a gadolinium-based nanodiamond particle for MRI, which is effectively like the brightest agent on the planet. The goal is not to make or to just load as much gadolinium as you can onto a particle and make it super bright. The goal is to make each gadolinium brighter so that you can give a lot less to a patient because this stuff is pretty toxic. So we were able to make something that was about 20 times brighter per gadolinium, so that's pretty interesting. For drug delivery, we made various drug conjugated or drug-loaded nanodiamonds. I think that out of all the different particles we've made, really only 1 or 2 really have commercial viability or clinical viability. So I think it's really about picking the right indication, the right drug, and the right material to actually push through clinical development, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We've made some cool stuff like contact lenses laced with nanodiamonds, and then we've looked into some combination therapy with nanodiamonds as well. A couple years ago here at UCLA, we made, as I mentioned, contact lens. We embedded nanodiamonds laced with timolol such that this stuff only released when in contact with lysozyme, right? So instead of dipping a contact lens into drugs, you have to store contacts in liquid, right? So if you're not even using it and you have to store it in liquid, the drug's just going to fall off. And so in this case, you can store it in liquid only until it contacts lysozyme, which is found in your tears, do the drugs actually start to release for anti-glaucoma applications, right? So that was something cool that we made. But the bulk of what we do is still focused on cancer. And so a couple years ago, we published a paper in Science Translational Medicine. And what we were trying to do was to overcome drug resistance with what we call nanodiamond doxorubicin, or NDX. And so right now, chemotherapy, a big challenge is that when people are given chemo, they develop resistance. And in certain cases, resistance is when the drug is ejected out of the tumor before it has a chance to work. And there are many approaches being explored to overcome drug resistance with nanoparticles. And in this case, with NDX, it takes us like 20 minutes to synthesize a new batch of this material. It's sterilized, it's dispersed, it's packaged, ready to go, it's highly scalable, and the drug binding between DOX, the drug, and nanodiamond requires no modification to the nanoparticle or the drug, and the bind is actually quite potent, such that, if you look at some efficacy here, so this is for breast cancer, drug alone, compared to saline, which is your control, doesn't really do much for this particular cancer model, right? So if you look at the control, tumor keeps growing. This is saline and drug alone. Right here, if you take the drug and you stick it on the nanodiamond, it does much better. This is tumor volume, so the tumors are smaller. If you double the dose of the drug, it becomes lethal, all right? So the animals can't even survive the full length of the study if you double the dose of the drug. If you simply tag this drug with nanodiamond, every single animal survives, and you get the smallest tumors in the study. So tons of cancer studies out there where tumors go from big to small, right, in an animal. So we've cured cancer in mice like 10 million times, right? There's a reason why cancer is not cured in the clinic, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But what interests me more is tolerance, right? So you've taken something that is not tolerable at all. By simply modifying a little bit, the tolerance has gone up quite a bit, right? So if you look at A survival curve, these are where animals die, they kind of fall off, and we monitor that. So the blue and the yellow star, this is drug alone and saline, the animals pretty much die at the same rate. If you modify this dose with nanodiamond, they do better, they survive longer. If you look at the red star, this lethal dose is so toxic, the animals are worse off than if you just gave them nothing, right? They actually live longer. So super lethal dose of drug, if you simply tag it with nanodiamonds, every animal survives, smallest tumors in the study. We have since transitioned that to things like brain tumors. This is in rats. NDX in the brain. This is direct injection. You know, drug alone, pretty resistant. NDX, tumor's gone. Pretty clean tissue with NDX compared to drug alone. And again, a lot more cancer cell death with drug alone. And so this is like the most boring data ever. I'm not going to go over this in detail. Don't worry about it. But this is monkey data actually. So after we did a bunch of animal studies with looking at efficacy and safety, we moved into a monkey study, probably one of the more comprehensive monkey studies with Nano. We did over 20 monkeys, both genders, multiple dose. So we did a physiologically relevant dose, we did an elevated dose, we did repeat dose, we did 6 months, and for the monkeys, there was no apparent toxicity. So this data is looking at blood toxicity, urinalysis, survival, body weight, so on and so forth. And we actually just finished a canine, a dog study looking at PK. So we did NDX, dual gender, looking at ADME, as they call it, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, everything seemed fine. One thing I will note is that the dogs that were given doxorubicin alone, the drug alone, all but one died early. Okay, so we monitor their behavior after you give them the drug. They became sluggish, they don't eat, and then most of them, except one, passed away. And to let you know, this drug is the standard of care for greater than 90% of cancers that are out there, right? So when given to dogs, they actually die early. NDX given to the dogs, none of them died early, all of them survived, and after about 15 minutes of moderate sluggishness, they all started running around and eating again, all right? So all of that data, when plotted out, is actually not interesting at all, just like this data, all right? Nothing is really happening, okay? And so even though we have a ton of data taking tumors and turning them from big to small, it's actually this data that ultimately led to a trial being run here with a biomaterial laced with nanodiamonds, and then we actually just finished our pre-submission meeting with a regulatory agency, and we got the full go-ahead to submit for a phase 01 for NDX for Onco. And so here's a trial that was run here, still ongoing with a biomaterial laced with nanodiamond for oral health applications. And then before I kind of acknowledge everybody that made this work happen, an area I didn't get into is, I mentioned that, mice have been cured of cancer gazillion times. And so clinical trials for oncology are generally about sub 5% for success rate, all right? And what happens there is, people do like combination therapy, they deliver multiple drugs at the same time, and so on and so forth. And the standard of drug testing is using what they call dose escalation, right? You go into a patient, and you just try to escalate the dose, see how high you can go, and then you kind of see what's toxic, and you drop the dose a little bit, and you take that, and then you move on to phase 2, you look for efficacy, so on and so forth. When that strategy is done, again, it's the clinical standard, it's how pretty much all drugs are tested, that's kind of a sampling approach, right? You're kind of like playing around with dosages, and then you can design cohorts of patients differently, but sampling drug dosing is a lot of that is what actually leads to the trial failure in the end. A lot of drugs that could have been useful, because it's very hard right now using conventional approaches to sample dosing properly. We ran a clinical trial last year here, not with Nano, but with combination therapy in human, where we were able to show in real time drug synergy, where drugs work together or they work against each other, change in the same patient over time, which means drugs that were working together to help this patient over the course of treatment eventually started working against each other for that patient, all right? And so when conventional sampling of dosing is used to test drugs, it's actually no wonder why, all right? When people fix dosages using maximum tolerated dose, you'll be surprised, a lot of the drugs that are out there, especially for oncology, are given at the highest possible dose that's tolerated by the patient. But we have actually run prospective human trials to show that when certain drugs are dropped in dose, but when paired with another drug at the right dose, and there's different ways to figure that out, efficacy goes up at a lower dose when delivered in combination. all right? And so when done in a systematic and rational way, that's what explains why when fixing dosages of different drugs, not arbitrarily, right? There's still a system employed, but when they're done in a more rational way, you have a lot higher success rates with regards to response to treatment, all right? So that's a whole separate thing that we're looking at, but for the nanodiamonds, you know, it's been about 11 years since we started, from the cell studies to the mouse studies to the rat studies to the monkey studies to the dog studies, and now towards human studies for the submission meeting. And that was it was a 2-hour meeting, and they pretty much grill you on everything you've done over the past 11 years, ranging from pharmacokinetics to how often you want to administer. The clinician is there to answer questions about what indication, what disease, how patients will be recruited, and after that bombardment of questions for 2 hours, you get the go, no go on submitting your paperwork for a trial. So thanks to our collaborators, many of whom are up here, my team here, other teams here, both clinical, my good friends back at Northwestern, still UCSF and Singapore, you know, things are moving forward, and so we'll have a number of trials set up over the next 6 to 9 months. Thank you. Thanks for sticking around.